Hi guys, MaxNation1980 slash Animaspy slash Kyle here with more animation news. I haven't done a recap in a little while because, like I said, this isn't going to be weekly or bi-weekly. It's going to be whenever I get the chance to. A lot has happened between the last video and now, so I figured that I'd sort of jump in. We're 3 weekends into Cars 3's box office run, and Despicable Me 2 just came out. But before I get to the box office, I kind of want to go in order of the stories that had come about. So I'm going to start out with Blazing Samurai. Blazing Samurai is an animated feature that has been put on hold recently. In fact, Blazing Samurai was supposed to come out this summer. It was at one time scheduled for August of this year, and at one time it was scheduled for April of this year. It was supposed to be done by a couple of collaborating studios, Mass Animation, Arc Productions, or was it ArcLight, something like that. And it was supposed to be directed by Chris Bailey, who was the fellow who directed the 1995 Mickey Mouse short film Runaway Brain, and that's a great short film. It's one of my favorite Mickey shorts, old or new. And Rob Minkoff, one of the directors of The Lion King, who later went on to direct things like Mr. Peabody and Sherman and such, he was attached as producer, and it's based on Mel Brooks' Blazing Saddles, one of the greatest comedies ever made. It's one of the funniest movies ever made, and if you've never seen Blazing Saddles, it's a classic. You gotta watch it. Blazing Samurai is basically a cats and dogs reimagining of Blazing Saddles for a family audience, and Mel Brooks is actually attached as producer, and he's supposed to voice one of the characters in the movie. He gets around at 90-something, doesn't he? Anyways, it's not just Blazing Saddles with cats and dogs, but it's also Blazing Saddles with feudal Japan. So basically, the Western meets samurai movies meets Blazing Saddles, and that sounds like it could work, even if it isn't the R-rated movie that Blazing Saddles was. It could still work on its own, and I like how they're kind of saying that it's inspired by Blazing Saddles, and that it's not a remake of Blazing Saddles. It's just an original story that's heavily inspired by Blazing Saddles, and I can only imagine how far they can push it, given that it's probably going to be a PG-rated movie. It's had an all-star cast lock for a while, too, and after it was moved from August 2017, it didn't really have a concrete release date. It was just listed as a 2018 release. Open Road Pictures, who have released Toonbox's Nutjob movies and the movie Spark, A Space Tale, they are planning on releasing it. They were planning on releasing it in 2018. But now, it's to be determined. And I always considered the TBD status to be sort of like a black hole for movies. I don't know if Blazing Samurai will make it out. I just know that one of the companies involved in making it, ArcLight, is either Arc Productions or ArcLight. It's the studio that used to be known as Stars Entertainment. They're the ones who did all those direct-to-video Thomas the Tank Engine movies. They went out of business, or they laid off like tons of employees. I remember Cartoon Brew had this story, and it was pretty bad. So I don't know if they're really back on their feet. Apparently, they're part of a bigger company now. Apparently, they've partnered with somebody, Jam-Filled or something. I don't know if Blazing Samurai is back on the docket, but hopefully it gets made, because I actually thought it sounded pretty cool. It sounded like a really goofy, fun premise that could really work if given the right script and treatment. Next up, 3QU. Who's 3QU? It's a new studio that was founded by John H. Williams, and John H. Williams made a name for himself as one of the producers of the first Shrek, and I believe that he also produced the second Shrek. He always used those credentials when plugging the movies he had made afterwards. He had started an ill-fated animation studio after Shrek came out. It was called Vanguard Animation, and they did the films Valiant, Happily and Ever After, and Space Chimps, a real sterling lineup of classics right there, but it was always, from the producer of Shrek, from the producer of Shrek, from the producer of Shrek. So, apparently Vanguard Animation is now just Vanguard Films, it's just a name. 3QU, on the other hand, is the new studio that he's using to get back into animation. And so far, 2 feature-length films have been completed, both of which cost around $20 million to make: Charming and Gnome Alone. And I've talked about these before. Charming is kind of like Happily and Ever After, in that it's one of those fractured fairy tale Shrek wannabe kind of things. The trailer for it popped up on YouTube not too long ago, but then it got pulled. Apparently it's coming out, and this recording is taking place on July 5th. Apparently it's coming to theaters tomorrow in Greece. Any Grecians, can you confirm that for me? Supposedly it's supposed to come out in South Africa theatrically on August 4th. Well, apparently Charming and Gnome Alone. Gnome Alone is kind of like an 80s fantasy movie, as the director described, Peter Lepianotis. He's the director of The Nut Job, and he conceived and directed the short film that The Nut Job is based on, Surly Squirrel. Much different from The Nut Job. Check it out if you can find it on YouTube. It's actually much different from The Nut Job, and it's definitely more for adults, and definitely better than The Nut Job. Anyways, he's supposed to direct Gnome Alone, and that's sort of like an 80s fantasy story where a high schooler's house, her gnomes, her garden gnomes, have to fight these evil monsters called trogs, which come from a fantasy world, and they have to basically protect the house from the trogs. And, it's kind of a cool premise, and I kind of like the name of the bad guys because the trogs, Wild Thing. It's a band. It was the 60s. It was a band that was pretty good sized in the 60s. They had some hits like Wild Thing and With a Girl Like You, They're like a garage band of sorts. They had kind of a rough sound to them, but a very pop-friendly sound at the same time. But I'm getting ahead of myself here. Basically, two animated family features, both very low budget, and apparently Will Smith's brother's company, Smith Global, wants to release them theatrically. And I've seen the trailer for Charming, and I don't think that should be theatrical, but that's not my choice, it's theirs. Apparently they want to release Charming in the second quarter of 2018, and they want to release Gnome Alone at the end of this year, and even though we're halfway through the year, there's no concrete release date inked for Gnome Alone. So they better hurry up. I mean, not like they're expecting it to make huge blockbuster totals, and I haven't seen any footage from Gnome Alone, but I like the premise. I saw the poster in one of the first look images. It didn't look too awful for a $20 million production. I mean, Captain Underpants can come out looking like roses for $38 million, so why not Gnome Alone? Charming, I wish I could say the same about Charming. Charming looked, from the trailers, like a sort of direct-to-video or straight-to-Cartoon Network sort of TV movie, and it was just, look at the stars we have. We have Sia, we have Avril Lavigne, we have Demi Lovato, we have all these, these big names, it just feels like the umpteenth Shrek, chasing movie that should have come out back in 2006 or 2007. And that's the same problem that Happily and Ever After suffered as well. So, long story short, these two features have been brewing for a long, long time, and they're being made in association with Cinesight Animation, and it seems like they're going to get a theatrical release here in America of some form, whether it's limited or wide. Honestly, having seen the trailer for Charming, I think that one should just go straight to video, but Gnome Alone sounds like it could have potential, so long as it's not written like a run-of-the-mill kids movie, because a lot of these smaller movies that come through the cracks, you kind of hope that they're more experimental. These sort of movies that come through, but no, instead you get things like Norm of the North, where they're trying to chase what the heavies are doing, and then it just feels like a pale imitation of what's already not working as well. Like Norm of the North, for instance, and this was pointed out in the Nostalgia Critic's new review of it, those lemmings, they were trying to be like the Minions, and everything else had a sort of mid-2000s DreamWorks movie tone to it, or one of the, something like an Illumination movie, so they're just, these, this has always been a thing in feature animation. There's always those little sort of stragglers that try to ride the coattails of the bigger studios. The 90s had all the Disney musical wannabes and also the Don Bluth wannabes. And the early 2000s, everything was pretty much trying to copy Shrek. Oddly enough, they weren't going for Pixar-like ambitions. They were definitely aiming more for Shrek and, to a lesser extent, Ice Age. So you always get those little animated movies that come through the cracks and everything. And honestly, I just wish that one of these studios, with such, with these low budgets at their side, experiment, like what Real Effects is doing. Real Effects, came in with Freebirds, and Freebirds was kind of a safe draw. It was like a family movie. It feels like it was focus grouped, and it was just one of those mediocre family animated movies. But then they swung with The Book of Life, and now they're going to make Book of Life 2, and Kung Fu Space Punch, and Wish Police. They have all these great high-concept ideas. See, they're utilizing their low budgets. They're utilizing, they're taking advantage of the fact that they're not spending Pixar or DreamWorks-sized dollars on their features. They're going for subject matter and premises and ideas that, a studio like Illumination might avoid like the plague. So I'm interested to see how Gnome Alone turns out. I hope that's just a straight-up family-friendly fantasy movie with bite, because the director compared it to like Gremlins and Ghostbusters, and family movies and fantasy movies, aimed at families that were made in the mid to late, early to mid 80s, those movies were pretty rough. The PG rating back then really meant something. Nowadays, one toilet joke or somebody says something that goes over the kids' heads and automatically it gets a PG rating. But back then, PG movies were rough. Movies like Gremlins and Ghostbusters, they scared the living daylights out of kids. He also compared it to Monster Squad, which was rated PG-13, and that came out in the 80s. That was back when the PG-13 rating, meant something too. Nowadays, it's a little too broad and a little too vague. But back then, it meant something. The movie in question could be pretty harsh. But that's what the director compared it to, and I hope it kind of lives up to that statement, even if it might not. But we'll see what happens. Next up, Fox Animation has finally slated one of their movies. Now, for a long while, Fox Animation, and of course when I say Fox Animation, I'm talking about other animation that 20th Century Fox is working on that has nothing to do with Blue Sky. Of course, Blue Sky is under the umbrella as well. 20th Century Fox Animation is kind of like a low-key Warner Animation group where it's multiple studios doing the movie for the banner. But 20th Century Fox Animation doesn't really put a logo before Blue Sky's films or any of their other films. It's just sort of a tree for all their animated work. Basically, a folder to file all the animation. That includes things like The Book of Life, which was made by Real Effects, The Simpsons movie, and Fantastic Mr. Fox. So you can file that all under 20th Century Fox Animation. It's not really a studio per se, just again, a sort of file. And for a little while now, they've been trying to jumpstart a lot of productions because DreamWorks' deal with Fox ended this year with Captain Underpants. And now they're moving on to Universal and Comcast, now that Comcast owns them. So a big void has been left in Fox's animation. So they've been looking to fill that with movies that won't be made by Blue Sky. Blue Sky has their slate with Ferdinand, Pigeon Impossible, Escape from Hat, Frog Kisser. So now they're trying to get other studios in on the game. Like The Dam Keeper, which is the adaptation of the Tonko House short of the same name. The movie itself is going to be done by Tonko House as well, and it's going to be released by Fox. And the studio House Special that made A Tale of Momentum and Inertia, they're going to be doing the movie adaptation that Fox has commissioned as well. So it's going to be multiple different studios doing these animated films for 20th Century Fox. So they finally slated one of the movies, Nimona, which is based on the graphic novel by, well, it used to be a webcomic, but then it was all collected into a novel, and it was by Lumberjanes creator Noelle Stevenson. It's this really cool tale about these medieval-era villains and the powers they have and how they set out to stop this organization that isn't as good as everyone thinks it is. And it seems like, and it's been described as irreverent and has a lot of heart, so it's going to be one of those break the fourth wall kind of things. It's going to be very meta, I guess. And Stevenson's art style is very, very nice and appealing, and it's going to be directed by Patrick Osborne, who's the man who directed Feast for Walt Disney Animation Studios, which had this really great painterly CGI, which made it look like it was a hand-drawn film. So I wonder if they're going to apply that style, whichever studio makes it, to, I wonder if they're going to use that for the CGI and really get Stevenson's art style, really translate it well into CGI. Hopefully it's this really cool CGI look that's just an extension of what Osborne has done with Feast and also with his VR short Pearl, which made a lot of waves around award seasons last year. It's not known what studio is doing Nimona, but it is slated for February 14th of 2020, so that's still quite a while away, and that's also the week after the Loud House movie comes out, so who knows if there'll be any release date chess games in the near future. I mean, it's quite a while away, so anything could change, but it's cool to see Fox Animation slate one of those movies that they've announced over the past, 2 to 3 years. It's cool to see one of those movies with a concrete release date. And I'm looking forward to it. It sounds like it could be a lot of fun. And now on to the box office. Despicable Me 3, for the 3-day, opened with $72 million. And a lot of people are wondering, why did it open so much lower than the last one? Simple! Like I said in my previous animation ramble, And like I said ad nauseum on my blog, it is following the route that sequels normally follow at the box office, especially animated sequels. And I made a chart recently to prove that, and how most animated movies, the first one usually sells the most tickets. The gross might be higher on the sequel because of rising ticket prices and inflation over the years, because it seems like ticket prices are rising every day, every hour it seems. Like, if you look at the Toy Story movies, for instance, Toy Story 2 sold 4 million more tickets than the first one, and Toy Story 3 sold about the same amount, you know. It was a slight, climb upwards. But with other animated movie series, it's usually the first one that makes the most in ticket sales, and then it's like a steady decline from there. But there are some exceptions. Shrek and Despicable Me, oddly enough. Shrek 2 outsold its predecessor by a wide margin, as did Despicable Me 2. Shrek 2 sold 24 million more tickets than the first Shrek, and that rarely ever happens with sequels, animated or not. That's like a Terminator 2, Austin Powers and the Spy Who Shagged Me case, where the first movie was kind of a sleeper, and it exploded on video after it had come out, and it was still fresh in people's minds when the sequel came out, and everybody rushed to see the sequel. That usually doesn't happen with most film series or franchises. Even in live action, like, none of the Star Wars movies have sold as much tickets as the first Star Wars movie, A New Hope. And another good example, the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies. 2 and 3 did not sell as much tickets as the first one. And everybody says that 2 is better than 1, but 1 still sold the most tickets. But Despicable Me 3 is basically doing what Shrek 3 did. Shrek 3 sold much less tickets than the second one, and it was more on the level of the first one, despite the really high gross. And the same thing applies to Despicable Me 3, Minions notwithstanding. The series has been around for 7 years now, so there's a steady decline there. And I think that's so because it's become much more kid-oriented. It's become much more kid-oriented than it started out as. Like, I think the first Despicable Me is a genuinely good family-friendly comedy. It's not amazing or anything, it's not a mountain mover, but I like it. I think it's very well made, and I think that there's a story there that keeps me, an adult viewer, interested. With Despicable Me 2 and Minions, all I saw was noise. Like, I'd like it if I was 6, but if there's no substance for the adult viewer, they start to get disinterested, and the parents could say to the kids, nope, we're going to wait till that comes out. But, you also have to factor in, adults who go to see animated movies by themselves, open-minded, free-thinking adults. I saw the first Despicable Me, and I was 17 at the time, almost an adult, but I saw it. I didn't have any kids in tow, I just saw it. I saw it with my good friend. He was my age at the time, too. But we saw it, and we enjoyed it because it had a good story. I ended up missing Despicable Me 2 in theaters, but I saw it on demand when it came out. And I honestly wasn't as impressed with it, so I kind of sat Minions and Despicable 3 out in terms of theatrical viewings. And I suppose that a lot of adults did the same. Like, a lot of adults who enjoyed the first movie probably backed off after how not so good the second one was and how shoddy Minions was. No offense to anybody who might like those more than the first Despicable Me. In my humble opinion, Despicable Me 1 was the only good movie in the franchise. But even then, it's still the natural decline, because usually the first one does the best. I think what's more concerning is how Cars 3 is doing. It dipped nearly 60% this past weekend, and a lot of people are wondering why. Like, why is that franchise of all things slipping? Because the first Cars had excellent legs at the box office. The second one didn't have good legs because, well, a lot of people agreed it wasn't all that good of a movie and it had issues. And, the whole premise of the movie alienated a lot of people who appreciated the first movie, so I can see why the second Cars didn't do as well at the box office. Bad reviews notwithstanding. Cars 3, on the other hand, got more or less the same reviews of the first movie, oh, it's good, but not Pixar good, that sort of reaction that I absolutely detest, because just because it's not the greatest thing since sliced bread doesn't mean it's a piece of crap. I liked Cars 3 a great deal. I had some issues with it, but I thought it was really, really good. Anyways, it opened fine enough, but it's dipping hard weekend by weekend, and I just kind of chalk it up to ticket prices being so high these days, and families having to limit their choices, and with Despicable Me 3 around the block, yeah, what do you go for, that or Cars? And also, again, the natural decline for these series, by the time they get to the third installment. The problem is, Cars 3 might have arrived a little too late on the scene. Even though corporate Disney keeps all the Pixar IPs alive through the theme parks and through merchandise, maybe Cars, some people, their interests in Cars kind of waned over the years. Like, we'll just wait till Cars 3 comes out on demand, no need to shell out $20, $30, $40 to see that in theaters. The general public is not like you and I, where we kind of make it a point to see most of the animated movies, or at least see them when they come out on demand. But a lot of audiences, with Pixar, like if it was Toy Story 4 that came out this summer, it would be battling for that top spot with Despicable Me 3. It would be like the battle of the century. But because it's Cars, not one of the more popular Pixar franchises with adult audiences, it naturally slipped. And that's not a bad thing per se. I mean, it's still going to make a boatload of money through the toy sales, and I have a feeling that this is going to ensure that they're not going to make a fourth Cars. And I honestly don't want them to make a fourth one, because the third one had a very good ending, a very fitting ending at that. Without spoiling anything, it's very much like Toy Story 3's ending, where it's kind of bittersweet, but at the same time, it doesn't make you bawl your eyes out the way Toy Story 3 did, but what I'm saying is they're both similarly bittersweet endings where it makes sense. It's not like it's forced to be the ending that some might want it to be. And I was actually very happy with the decision they made, and I think it's a fine send-off to all the characters of the series. It's just a really, really strong closing. So to make a fourth Cars, I think, they don't have to. It's not really, really needed. I wouldn't mind seeing the series continue in the form of like TV series or shorts or or a TV special like they did with Toy Story. And I was kind of hoping that Toy Story 4 would have never gotten greenlit, and that they would have just kept making TV specials like Toy Story of Terror and Toy Story The Time We Forgot, which were both very good. But no, Toy Story 4 is happening because of how well Toy Story 3 did. It made $1 billion at the worldwide box office. Disney executives were probably hammering Pixar for a fourth one ever since. And Pixar just said, no, we're going to wait till we come up with a good idea. And then they did in 2012, and then they officially announced it in 2014, only to delay what was supposed to come out this summer all the way back to summer 2019. So that actually kind of gives me confidence in Toy Story 4, because at least they want to take their time on it and get it right, not rush it out just so Disney can be happy. They put Cars 3 in its place instead. And while Cars 3 might come up short at the box office, it's no big deal. It really, really isn't. It only just sucks for the people who worked very hard on it, who poured their heart and soul into it, because, regardless of what some may think of the Cars franchise, I really think that they really put a lot of effort into this one. They knew how much people did not like Cars 2, and they put their all into this third one, as if they knew it was going to be the last one. So, yeah. Captain Underpants continues to slip down the rail, and it's fine. It cost $38 million to make. It's already doubled that. So hopefully when it hits other countries, because it doesn't have a very big international release, but it is going to roll out in some key markets like the UK and Brazil. They're going to get the movie sometime this month and into August and September. So it's still got some time to make 2.5 times its budget. So I don't think Captain Underpants is a flop. If anything, DreamWorks really saved its collective rears by outsourcing that picture to Micros, and it came back at $38 million. So right now, animation box office, it's the usual. Despicable Me did what I expected it to. Like, everyone's saying, franchise fatigue, sequel fatigue. It's like, no, this is the usual progression when it comes to animated movies. I knew that Despicable Me 3 was going to perform like Shrek 3 at the box office. Very good sized, just not as good as the breakout sequel. And that's okay, because it's already made like almost 3 times its budget. It's only been out a couple days. It only cost $80 million to make because Illumination spends $80 million or less on their features. So Despicable Me 3 is already going to make them a nice profit. I think the real tester will come in 2020 when the Minions movie comes out. I think that movie is truly going to test how long Despicable Me is going to last, because when Shrek 4 came out in 2010, it was the worst one attendance-wise. Like, it sold less tickets than Shrek 1, and it even grossed less than Shrek 1, adjusted and with 3D, unadjusted with 3D added and everything. So Minions 2 could perform like that, and maybe kind of ensure the end of Despicable Me as a movie franchise. I mean, Despicable Me could probably continue as a TV show or as some kind of toy line. Who knows? But, you know, these kinds of things, I kind of see them as short-term. They don't last forever. It's not like a Marvel Cinematic Universe thing where they can keep the momentum going because they get to release one every year. Now 3 every year. And the same thing with Star Wars. You know, Star Wars, that's like a perennial favorite. Like, they could make 1 million Star Wars movies. Oh, okay, maybe I'm exaggerating, but they could make a ton of Star Wars movies and people would still see them. People wouldn't get tired of Star Wars because Star Wars is classic. They'd only get tired of Star Wars if it's the same old, and if the results are just not all that good. It's just eh. And that's kind of the case with Despicable Me. It's just results for adults. Although, you'd be surprised, there's a lot of adults who come out of that movie and say, oh, it was cute, I enjoyed it, I laughed, it was funny. I see that a lot at the theater that I work at. Tons of adults come out of sugary, mediocre animated movies like the Despicable Me sequels, and they're just like, oh, it was fun. It's like, I had a great time. I was like, that's cool. But there's a good half of the population out there that just wouldn't bother with that and would rather go see something like, a Pixar film or something critically acclaimed, something on that level. So, yeah, Despicable Me 3 is showing that the series is stabilizing. It's sort of sinking back into what it was. Pretty popular, but not the hugest thing ever. And it'll probably slip more and more with each installment, because that Illumination is going to pump them out, because the worldwide audiences make these things huge hits. If Despicable Me 3 doesn't quite impress domestically, there's always worldwide. The worldwide grosses will probably get that thing close to $1 billion. So, that's just, that's just the way it goes. Thanks for listening. Signing off.